それでは次のご講演に移りたいと思います。次はセルゲイ・フェセンコ先生です。セルゲイ・フェセンコ先生はマイアッププラント事故の後、水生生物に対する長期生態影響評価、それから放射性各種の分析についてご研究され、モスクワ大学で博士号の学位を取得されております。その後、チェルノブイリ事故の影響評価や農業と林業におけるマネジメントなどについて、多くの国際放射線生態学のプロジェクトに参加されていらっしゃいます。現在は IAEA インターナショナルアトミックエナジーエージェンシー、国際原子力機構ですね、において放射線生態学、それから放射線防護、緊急対応の専門家として影響評価など、放射線影響評価など、その修復についてもご活躍され、研究され、ご活躍されています。今日は、The Incident of Chernobyl and the Subsequent Forest Contamination Issue というタイトルで発表していただきます。すみません、タイトル日本語はチェルノブイリ原発事故による森林環境影響についてということで、フェセンコ先生、お願いします。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk, which is quite a challenging issue for both accidents, for the Chernobyl accident as well as for the Fukushima accident. And I'm very glad to be here to talk about. It was already mentioned that I am representing International Atomic Energy Agency. There's something strange again with the can you hear me well? Okay. Actually, speaking about the comparison of the accidents at the Chernobyl ENEP and the Fukushima accident, we can say that certainly Chernobyl accident was much more, I would say, high in terms of the released radionuclides. And you can see this from the table, you can compare that. But there were some other factors which were contributing to the consequences of this accident. Actually, the Chernobyl accident was mainly, again, I would say, potential accident. So the wind was very variable, and high areas were contaminated after the Chernobyl accident around the Europe mainly. And you can see the areas which were affected by the Chernobyl accident. These are high areas or forests contaminated after the accident. So the scale of the problem was very large after the Chernobyl accident, and it was much higher than for the Fukushima case, when the wind direction was in the first period directed at the ocean. Fukushima nuclear power plant is located at the ocean shore, and the terrestrial contamination was much lower in the case of the Fukushima accident. This is what I was saying about the Washington release. The pattern because something. You see, the variable release is the week of the release of the Fukushima accident, a little bit lower in terms of the time. Actually, release after the Chernobyl accident, and both accidents resulted in the very homogeneous contamination of the lands. But as I told you, in the case of the Fukushima accident, the wind direction was in the ocean in many cases, and loss, not big fraction of radionuclides was directed to the terrestrial ecosystems. Speaking about forests, I have to say that forests are very valuable natural resources which provide a lot of economic, nutritional, recreational and social benefits to people. That's why it is very important for people to use forests without any restrictions. And in many areas contaminated after the radiation accident, especially in the case of the Chernobyl accident, the forest and forest products, as I will show you a little bit later, was a very important source of the internal and external exposures briefly. And I would like also to mention that there are so-called critical groups of the population. These groups are people who are using forest products intensively than on average. So because of the consumption of the forest products on some special behavior patterns, these people are exposed much higher than on average, so-called critical group. We have to keep it in mind when we are speaking about assessment of the impact of the forest contamination. As I mentioned, because of that, we have to consider all major routes by which people may be exposed as follows. This is a source of the industrial products, so people can be exposed using forest as a source of the maybe furniture, for building houses, etc. Forest provides a lot of forest products. In the Chernobyl case, these are firewoods, mushrooms and berries, which are important component of the diet of people inhabiting the affected areas. And the forest also heart of the cultural life, so it is very important for walking and for camping and to consider forest as a natural media for people. In the long term after the Chernobyl accident, the importance of forest in contribution of the forest to the dose of the population was increased for many settlements. So in the first period after the accident, for the Russian forest settlements affected by the Chernobyl accident, the contribution was around 10-15%, and the major contribution was milk and some other animal products. But in the later on, this contribution achieved already 40-45%. In 1997, the reason is this effective whole lives of cesium in major agricultural products were much faster than in the forest products. That's why the reduction of the contamination of the forest was much lower. And we even observed some increase in some forest products. For example, in wood, we observed increase for many locations. I would like to define also some basic definitions used for assessment of the radicalites in the forest. So these are aggregated transfer factors which are used to describe radicalite transfer from soil to forest. It is the mass activity density in some media such as mushrooms, wood, etc., yet divided by the area contamination density. Concentration ratio, which are used to quantify radicalite transfer from soil to some specific forest products such as plants and even animals, if we are saying about radicalite transfer from feeds to muscles of animals, for example. Biological whole life, this is a very unnatural parameter which quantifies the reduction of cesium activity extractions in the body of animals, extraction from the organisms. This is defined as a time required for the autofold decrease of the radicalite activity extractions in organisms. The ecological life, this is analog at the ecosystem level. So it is time required for the autofold decrease of the radicalite activity extraction in some environmental compartments that lump all processes which can provide a reduction of activities, some specific medias. How to approach forest? So we need to create, first of all, environmental monitoring system, as you're doing now in the Fukushima affected areas. We have to analyze based on that exposure pathway. So exposure pathway analysis is quite important to assess which remedial actions should be implemented and how they should be implemented. Application of many options are based on the evaluation of the factors yet governing behavior of radionuclides in the environment and the processes which are responsible for the high accumulation of radionuclides in some environmental forest compartments. We have also wished assess and take into account some preferences given by the population to different options. For example, implementation of such options as the banning of some forest products and restriction on forest use were rejected by the people in many forest settlements in the areas affected by the Chernobyl accident. That's why these measures were not so effective as it was expected at the very beginning. And it's very useful to use the dynamic models for the simulation of the application of different remedial options to understand how effective they are in some specific situations. As an example, I would like to provide you one example for one of the most contaminated forest area which in Russia located in the Bryansk region of the forest. In Bryansk region or the Russian Federation. This area is located at a quite big distance from the Chernobyl ENEP, distance about 180 kilometers. The contamination is forest soil is very high, from 150 to 2,500 kilobecquerel per square meter. Total population is around 60 persons living in 111 settlements. We subdivided this area into several classes, having minimized contamination density and properties of forest. It was quite useful to suggest some different strategies for the forest remediation. And here you can see, first of all, application of the model, for a fund model, and some empirical data which we received for this area. You can see that actually aerial action level of 5 millisievert was achieved soon after the 1990, but the action level of 1 millisievert, which indicates the need in which demands in the application of the remedial options, can be achieved in some areas quite a long time. For example, in the most contaminated area, it can be achieved only in 2020. This is supplementary data on the dynamics of Latissium activity concentration in mushrooms and in berries. Something wrong with again with that. Can you see? Because yes, I cannot see myself. You see mushrooms here. You can see which detection levels which adapted before 2002 and after 2002, and you can see that the contamination of mushrooms should be considered as a high, so mushrooms will exceed contamination levels permissible for the trade, etc. quite a long time after the Chernobyl accident, so this issue will be of high importance. Actually, there are quite complex environmental pathways which have to be considered when we come into the contaminated forest. First of all, we have to consider the change of radionuclide between available and unavailable soil. We have to take into account the root uptake, ingestion of some forest feeds by the animals and birds which further can be consumed by the population. We have to also take into account food processing and direct consumption of many forest products. And here, yes, I would like to show you some information about attribution of the forest which pathway to the total doses to the population. I did it in which percents for the areas which were considered before. And we can see that for the normal population, the attribution of the forest pathway is around 25%. As for the critical groups of the population, for people who are using forest more extensively for forestments, a similar groups of the population, it is much higher and up to 19%. That's why I would like to emphasize the importance of the forests which are countermeasures. Okay. Looking about processes which are governing radionuclide transfer in the forest, I would say I will start from the very beginning, from the intersection by radionuclides by the forest vegetation, looking at some available data from the Russian experience, from the Russian monitoring programs. Actually, the type of deposition, wet and dry, size of radioactive particles is of high importance for that. And we also observed a very clear seasonality effect, because you see, when there is no biomass, for example, for the deciduous trees, the interception will be much lower than in the summer when biomass of leaves is high. Its availability of different feeds for game can provide rather homogeneous seasonality effects for the animals, because you see availability of different feeds is different in different seasons. So sometimes in some seasons game can consume, for example, mushrooms, and in this case contamination of muscles of game or which is intended for hunting will be extremely high. So we need to take into account when we are planning our remedial actions. Forest characteristics definitely should be taken into account, such as age of trees, biomass of trees, type of trees, because these factors provide impact on the dynamic of radionuclides and trees. And here I would like to show you some information from Kishtim affected areas, because you see I did my PhD thesis there, so I am familiar with many such question-type jobs. You see, what was observed after the Kishtim accident? We observed quite fast reduction in the first period in contamination of strontium in leaves and in the external bark. But in the leaves, after some period, after 5 years after the accident, we observed growth because root uptake. So the dynamics of strontium accumulation in leaves was really very homogeneous. Root uptakes we can see also here when we are discussing about internal bark, because internal bark, this is a media where some salient and phloem channels are located, and this is main route from radionuclides from soil to assimilation organs such as leaves, new branches, etc. So for wood, we also have some growth of the activity accelerations in hardwood. Accumulation of radionuclides in plants and mushrooms, it also very dependent on many factors which are very important and which allow us to explain why the contamination of these subjects is quite different. So root locations in soil relative to the contamination profile can explain the homogeneous dynamic of the many species of mushrooms which combination. So we know that forest species are quite different in terms of the requirements from the nutrition, for example, for potassium, and these species can accumulate much more cesium than others. Radionuclide distribution in soil and redistribution between these layers is also important to understand. Type of soil, in particular water regime, is very important, because in the Chernobyl case you have many areas which are dry, so in that case the processes were not so intensive than in areas affected by the Fukushima accident. And type of the nutrition substrate, such as, for example, wood for some mushrooms, can also substantially affect the transfer of radionuclides to food bodies. And here I'd like just to show you some information about just an illustration of what I was saying about the contamination of different species of mushrooms. So the maximum observed was observed in aquatic bodies, so it is quite known accumulators which that. I suspect that there are similar species also here in areas affected by Chernobyl incident, by the Fukushima accident. The same data are given for different species of berries and for pine. This picture also illustrates how age of trees can affect the patterns of the distribution of the radicalized among annual readings. So these are results of our meteorology program in the Bryansk region. So actually the general conclusion is that it is very difficult to identify a contamination yet even based on this data. So it means that tritium is very much mobile in the trance of pine and deciduous trees like a birch, etc. But you see, in case of the Japanese cedar, the situation can be different because you see plants are very different in terms of the structure of the hardwood. So we have to take it into account. And you see, this patterns also depends on the height on the where we can take these samples. This picture reflects impact of the soil properties and the water regime on the radiculite transition, and not only on the radiculite transition to different pine trees, but also to the dynamics of radiculite transition after the deposition. For example, for the radial soils, we have in many cases some reduction and some increase, but it is not the case for the wet soils, where we have much higher accumulation, but also rather homogeneous dynamics after the contamination. Also, there are many factors which should be into account considering remedial actions for game. So, transition factors from different feeds to muscles, biological lives, feeding ratios, seasonality variation in availability of different feeds, type of forest also is highly important for such assessments. We make several models because it was very suitable tool to optimize application of the remedial measures in the forest. So in many cases we have to provide some, I would say, predictions what we can achieve in many situations. This model considers four major soil horizons: litter, fermentic layer, organic soil, and mineral soil. We consider transport to the different tree compartment, to different feeds for animals, for wild animals, for game, for moose and roe deer in our case. And we also consider radiculite transition to fungi, to berries. We also take into account the attribution of fine root systems in these horizons, and also consider the attribution of the mycelium of mycorrhizae or fungi in these compartments. So this combined application, as I mentioned, is important to properly predict the dynamic of tritium in some species. Actually, this is a dynamic model which consider also some dose which components, so it can be used also for the assessment of the external and internal doses to the humans, and we even use this model to assess impact of the non-human species in the areas yet affected by the Chernobyl accident. Actually, saying about the application of the remedial wash interactions, we have to mention, we have to emphasize that we cannot leave the forest without some support, environmental support, forest service. Forest service is necessary to prevent forest fires, and you know this issue was of high concern for Ukraine and even for Russian Federation. So there were some dry years and there were strong forest fires, and it was a high concern for the public in the surrounding settlements. We have also to keep under control the animals number and some potential diseases which can also result into the quality, in the reduction of the quality of this forest. This level of management should continue even the decision is taken about banning to restrict access to both members of the public and workers in this forest. So we can minimize forest management, but we need to provide this forest management for the whole time when the forest access is restricted. And also we calculated how much manpower is required for that, depending on the probability of the forest fires. We use this information for such planning. So the most popular measure after the Chernobyl accident was, as it was done after the Fukushima accident, this is limiting public access to the forest and banning the collection of mushrooms and berries in many, many contaminated areas. These options can provide substantial reduction of the public occupancies within the forest, and doses can be forest doses can be also very low, close to zero. So this option is quite good, but as I mentioned, not many people follow these recommendations, and it was very difficult to keep this action under the control. That's why after the first 5, maybe 7 years after the accident, we came to some kind of the optimizing approach, optimization of the forest management. So this measure was supported by extended site-specific information, simulations of different scenarios. For every settlement, we are able to provide some information about contamination levels around these settlements, and also maps indicating how to use this actually forest. So which mushrooms can be taken from every forest site, which wood can be harvested and where, what age of wood, which year can be harvested. So it was based on the both combination of the measurements made in the forest and actually simulations made with the forest. Here you can see a map of the probability of the exceeding of the action level for mushrooms. But such maps were provided for all forest products. And having this information in mind, we can optimize to use this forest. So people can use the forest already effectively. So they can work with the contamination forest as they do. So some options inside of this Washington approach was a limitation of the tree harvesting and forest products collection to areas with the low contamination. So we provided some maps which allow to do these options in practice. So this option allows not only provision the low contaminated actually wood, but also can provide lower doses to the foresters which are dealing with this. And as I mentioned, actually, forest contamination of forests not only which year but depends on the age. So here you can see some actually information on the time which dependence on the contamination of wood at the different forest sites, at different soils, the semi-hydromorphic wet soils, and dry soils. And you can see that with the course of time we can find a suitable time when these trees can be harvested. So we can calculate such time periods which we can keep until the forest will be suitable for the harvesting in terms of its contamination. Some options were Washington to develop but not applied in the large scale. This is a forest utilization options. So we use these options for some very sensitive areas where we need to demonstrate that it could be achievable, but it was not possible to apply in the large scale because of the vast area which is contaminated. But it works also for some area conditions, for example, for the forest surrounding settlements, surrounding children's garden, etc., such as some which creek family, etc. Here I would like just to illustrate this with some pictures. You can see that we can achieve some effect of fertilizing the forest. This data are for pine trees. Similar data are available and recently published also for Sweden, because they have a long-term experiment which observed. Actually, many countries did a similar experiment with the same results. Here you can see data for some understory species, for bilberry, for example, etc. The same data available actually also for mushrooms, but for mushrooms it is not always yet the case, because as you know, it is not always possible to get mushrooms in case of the radioactive contamination, and we can actually damage the epithelium. So this option is not always good for mushrooms, just for one special species. For the animals, it was quite interesting measures based on the changes of the hunting time and the application of these options in the periods that we have peak concentrations of radicalized in the muscles of the game. So as you can see, there are some very sensitive periods when we have extremely high concentration of radicalized in meat of game. And if you will shift a little bit in hunting time, or if you will provide, for example, salt licks to the mushrooms during such sensitive periods, we can get acceptable levels in the almost all species of wild game. Here I provided data for roe deer, for wild boar, for moose in some areas, just illustrating that these patterns are very common for different countries and for different areas. I'm practically sure that similar pictures can be also obtained for the areas affected by the Fukushima accident. It is not only some such, I would say, management options such as shifting of the hunting time. We also can provide some acidium binders with salt licks, because animals consume salt, and if you will provide them during such sensitive periods, we can achieve some good results with this. Many options can be applied in the combined options. So we can combine these options and to achieve good effect, high effect. Will be compared with the case when options are applied individually. So when we, after the 20 years of the accidents, more attention was given already to the complex approach to the assessment of the remedial options. For example, all options were assessed already based on the account, taking into account effectiveness, but not only effectiveness, but also feasibility, technical feasibility of the options. We also were assessing economic cost, waste generation options, because you see our intention was to avoid waste generation options as much as possible. Social and ethical issues were taken into account, because you see it was very important to work with the stakeholders, and public is one of the most important stakeholders. So social and ethical issues should be taken into account. Site environmental effect, as I mentioned already, for mushrooms. And there are also some constraints on the application of many such options. And looking at the Fukushima, actually, the way of the remediation of the forest around the Fukushima accident areas was almost the same as we did after the Chernobyl accident. So, banning a restriction on wild food and local monitoring was most important issue, most important option. Actually, option applied in the first period after the deposition. The specific feature of the application of the remedial options after the Fukushima accident was removal of the surface materials and branches nearby the settlements at a distance about 20 meters of the border of the forest. And next slide illustrates comparison between these two options. So these options are almost the same issues implemented with similar access after the Chernobyl and Fukushima accident. Certainly people surrounding these areas after the Fukushima accident follow the recommendations much strictly than in areas affected by the Chernobyl accident. But after that we came to the approach based on the optimization of the forest management. And I hope this approach will be in use also in areas affected by the Fukushima accident in the near future. Actually now, yes, I would like to make you familiar with some documents and some books which can be scrutinized to, if you would like to go to some details. So look at these documents. They can easily be downloaded from the IAEA.org site. So all these publications are public available. And I would like also to provide you with some information about useful references. If you would like to be specialized in this area, you can use them as a guidance for that. Thank you for your attention.
Fesenko 先生ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
Thank you.
では質問、コメントある方、挙手をお願いいたします。今日お話に出てこなかったことでもおっしゃる。
Thank you, Sergey, for a nice presentation. You showed a slide of decreases of cesium due to fertilization in forest products. And I was wondering if that was a one-time, you showed it for several years. Is that a one-time application or a fertilizer was applied every year?
No, it was actually one-time application in 1992, and after that they observed effects for many years, at least for 10 years, something like that.
Thank you.
Because you see, actually, not only fertilizer but also lime can be effectively applied for exit soils if there are forests with exit forest soils. So this measure can be effectively applied, but certainly not in the large scale because of the high cost.
他にありますでしょうか。はい、お願いします。
モデリングのところに関してちょっと研究されてたら教えていただきたいんですが、雪が降った時、私雪国出身なんで、北海道なんで雪国出身なんですが、冬の間例えば上から落ちてくるパーティクルマターというか粒子状物質っていうのが冬の間ずっと雪に沈着されていて、春先に一気に溶け出すっていうことが起きるんですけども、そういった影響がもし原発事故がまた次に起きた時に、雪が積もってる時に起きた時と雪が積もってない時に起きて、その後に秋に起きて、その後雪が降ることによって水の塊ですから、それで遮蔽効果があって外部被曝が減るとかっていう、そういった違いみたいなものはモデリングの時に検討されてるんでしょうか。
Yes, certainly. Actually, not only for the case which was mentioned in your question, that's clear that impact interception, initial interception, naturally dependent in which form radicalites are coming to the forest ecosystems. With snow, with rain, with wet deposition, because you see rain is totally different from snow, which, by the way. And actually we use a special model for that, which was based on some experiments made in the UK, so we have first one accurate model which is intended actually for that. But snow is important not only for that, because you see, for example, for harvesting trees, if we will shift, certainly it is more difficult to do in the winter period, but if we will shift harvesting time from summer to winter, the snow will serve as for the attenuation of the contamination of the contaminated forest soil, and in this case, in external doses to the forest workers will be much lower. This is also one of the options which we consider as the optimization of the forest management. Did you get an answer?
他に質問、コメント、はい、お願いします。
有益な講演どうもありがとうございました。移行係数トランスファーファクターは、一つの、その放射性物質の挙動を表す上での一つのツールとして非常に有効なものなんですが、事故後のケースの場合においては非平行状態が続いています。この場合、単純計算をしてその値を、使うことが、いいのか、それとももしくは、モデル何かを使って、修正することが有効なのか、その辺のところコメントがあれば教えてください。
My opinion is that, as I mentioned already, that all forest the processes are very time dependent. So the patterns of the behavior are very homogeneous. So it is not possible to use simple equations like exponential curve for the predictions what we can expect in the near future. It is much better to use a dynamics model which take into account some regularities. Look at this picture, Washington, for example. If you look in the leaves, we can have some rather unusual behavior, but it is unusual only on the first look because it is very natural. Because in the first period we have external contamination of leaves, and you see when the leaves goes to the year 4 liter further, we have already quite high growth because of the root uptake. So we always have to consider some reverse processes which have to be balanced in the proper way. That's why I would not be in position to use simple equations based on the current experience. We need to have a look also at the processes to predict what we can expect in the future. And all processes are not in the equilibrium right now in the areas affected by the Fukushima accident. It is not only because the process mentioned in my presentation. Also, Alexei mentioned that in there are many processes like wash-off in this area, so there is distribution of radicals between different types of the landscape. So there is accumulation of different types of the and some depletion of radicals from some of the areas with the high slope. So it is not so easy question to answer with the aid of the simple equations. In any case, we have to come to the dynamic models describing them.
ありがとうございます。はい、お願いします。
So this is a very interesting presentation. I have a question for this.
Yes. Okay.
We can see the first decrease in Snows external back.
Yeah.
How do you explain this? Is it just the flow and washing or internal translocation? I mean.
Yes. You see, actually, this is dead tissues. That's why, actually, not me, but authors of this publication, he considered that this media is only exposed to the external contamination, and after that, because of throughfall and before it was decontaminated as what self-clearance process. But internal bug, this is totally another story. But if we will take total bug, we will observe some combination of these two, let's say, types of the tissue, and we will not be able to understand what really happened. Because you see, that bug is also, it forms the pluritum in the case of the, but it is also the case for any trees. But I just would like also to mention that this data we received already 40 years ago, or something like that, yeah? Rather a long time ago. And now we are doing similar job to understand the similarities and the differences in this process.
Situations are similar.
Yes, situation is similar and patterns should be similar.
例としてマップを出していただいたと思うんですが、どのチームゾーニングの
です。This part. No, this is case for Symposium. This is actually part of what we considered for our assessment. This is the region of the Bryansk, or the Bryansk region. And here the table provides different probability for exceeding of the actual levels for mushrooms. So this is 95%. So in these areas, there are 95% that will pick up mushrooms if the contamination level exceeding the permissible level. And for these areas, it is lower than 5%. So this is a probabilistic picture which we developed for different types of the forest products. And looking at that, we can understand where we can harvest trees, where we can get different risk, where we can harvest berries, where we can pick up mushrooms. These similar maps were provided for almost every settlement in Belarus. We provided such maps for them at the district level. But in Belarus, they provided such maps for every settlement. It is certainly a huge job, but it is very important because you see, these are not only maps, because you see, this is a book where there were some recommendations, general recommendations how to use these maps, what kind of mushrooms, some pictures of these mushrooms. So this is very useful for people wishing to have this information. But this is some future of the forest management. It is not possible to do like that. It takes time to get monitoring data, to create models, to make such assessments. It really takes time.
で、それの、ような図で、実際この森林の、そのシナリオの中で、例えば後で切るとかいくつかそのシナリオが出されたと思うんですが、そういういわゆる樹木の利用についてもこういうマップというのができているということです。もしそうだとしたら、
Yes.
それ
Yes.
それをそのコピーPDF の何か見せていただく可能性があるものありますか
No, I have it just as a hard copy for Belarus, so I can print it next time. But you see, there is some restrictions. Still, there are some restrictions on the sharing this information in the PDF format. But you see, these authorities can provide hard copies. So I can bring a hard copy for you. These books, examples of these books. So. Actually, this is a part of the recommendations of the forest management. I can try, but you see now, yes, I live in Vienna, not in Russia, not in Belarus. So before maybe it would be available for me, but not now because I am now at the other side of this game. But I definitely can bring a hard copy. To this example.
我が国でもようやく2月の動画そういった導入を検討し始めたようなので、ぜひともよろしくお願いします。
But this kind of information should be produced by you. You just can provide the example how it can be done. But already your job is to provide already some similar things, maybe even better maps for the Japanese areas affected by the Fukushima accident.
よろしいですか。はい。他にありませんか。はい、お願いします。
Thank you. I am interested about the modeling of the radionuclide behavior in forests. Yes. In this presentation, you just only show the accumulation in the tree, but there's many part of the forest like the shrub, branches, and also maybe organic matter in the soil forest like that. Is there any information about which part the highest accumulation in the forest itself? because you just only show the tree, but maybe there is information about the soil or maybe the organic matter in the soil.
Certainly we have this information, and not only this information, but yes, I'm sorry. You see, actually, there was an international project which was specifically addressed to this issue. So, can you hear me? Because I'm not able to hear myself. You see, in this project, many countries, not many countries, around 10 countries presented their national models to be used to evaluate the behavior of radionuclides in the contaminated forest. And actually, we consider several contamination scenarios where the extended ecological information about contamination of different forest compartment was presented for the modeler, to the modelers. And it was, I would say, given us like a black box. So we had just information about ecological features of this forest. For example, depth of the forest vita, depth of the organic soil, depth of the mineral soil, so how much is the biomass of the trees, how much is biomass of the shrubs. All such information was provided. But information about the dynamics of radionuclides in these compartments was not provided. So we made such calculations, and after that, independent people, ESA referees, compared the results of our assessments with the real data. So you can find this information in this report. If you like, I can give this report to you directly because I have it at my computer. So there are many forest publications now which can provide reply to your question. If you need, I can provide you some papers, some literature of the subject, which I have at my computer. And this is addressed to everybody. If you need any information about the subject, I can send it to you by email, for example. I can give it to you directly here, because I have most of these publications at my computer. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you. ありがとうございます。
それでは少し休憩を挟みましょうか。あんまり休憩すみません。さっきちょっと休憩が長くてだれちゃいましたね。ちょうど予定通り進んでおりますが、30分から始めさせていただきたいと思います。で、アナウンスしてなかったんですけれども、隣のお部屋、まだお茶とか隣出したままですかね。いますね。隣のお部屋にお茶などありますので、よろしかったら来てください。では30分から次始めさせていただきたいと思います。
もう
皆さんよろしいでしょうか。そろそろ時間になります。人が減ってしまってそのまま続けてやればよかったんですけどはい、それでは総合討論を最後少しだけさせていただきたいと思います。今日4件のご発表がありましたが、まずはそれについて何か質問、コメント、または何か思い出したこと、言いたかったこと、言いたいことありましたら挙げてください。特にありませんかね。討論、質問、コメントの時間も十分に取られていたのでよろしいですか。はい、お願いします。
今日4人の方に、著名な方にいろいろお話伺ったんですけども、純粋に海外の研究者の方から見て、今回の福島の事故について、すごい漠然とした質問になってしまうんですけど、どういうふうに外から見て感じておられるのかっていうのを少しずつコメントいただきたいんですけどなんて具体的にはちょっと聞きにくいっていうかどんなことでもいいので、その外国の方から見た福島の事故をどういうふうに感じておられるかっていうのを聞きたい。
はい、では、お一人ずつに伺っていってよろしいですかね。まずケヘラ先生から少しずつでいいのでコメントいただければと思います。
So, I think the perception from Ireland is that sorry. I think the perception from Ireland is that initially the accident was so far away that at the time it was obviously in the public consciousness, but today it's not so much. Apart from the anniversary yesterday, it was in all the papers at home and in the media at home as well. From a research point of view, we are the only research institute who do radiometric measurements, and so we have actually taken measurements of the coast of Fukushima, and we are interested. But really, just from a research point of view, in terms of radiometric measurements and trying to take real measures and seizing what you for in the environment. I think the view from Ireland as well, in terms of the remediation of the accident or the response to the accident, was that, rightly or wrongly, that it was handled very well by Japan. And I suppose we saw from a distance that it was handled correctly.
Thank you.
I think the response from the Japanese public has been part of Japanese agencies, I guess, has been very impressive. The dose to the public was kept very low. There are many reasons for that. The remediation effort has also been very impressive. In fact, I wonder where all this money is coming from to pay for this incredible amount of remediation. I'm a bit curious why the consumption levels were set at 100 becquerels per kilogram when the European guideline is 600. I think that has some implications down the road as far as cost of remediation and might make it difficult. And I hope in the long term that there will be interesting data as far as chronic exposures and effects from low-dose radiation. We kind of missed out on the research related to that at Chernobyl. I hope that we can obtain some interesting data here at Fukushima. You know, there are some opposing views in the literature right now relative to effects of low-dose radiation on the environment. Some of the literature is claiming very pronounced effects at very low doses, whereas our long-term data sets from Chernobyl and beyond would suggest that's questionable. Those data are questionable. But yet, there aren't many data to compare to, so perhaps they're right. And in order to determine if these low-dose effect studies truly are right, we need independent data to either confirm it or perhaps question it.
I would like to stress again that due to the high precipitation, hilly slopes, steep slopes, higher average temperature during the year, and high biological activity in the top soil layer and in sediments. So we can expect that from a scientific point of view, the self-purification ability of the environment here in Fukushima contaminated area should be higher as compared to the Chernobyl and the Kashtim area in relation to radiocesium. This is one point. Another point I would stress is the point of glassy spherical hot particles, which were discovered here in Tsukuba in deposition from Fukushima accident. So these glassy hot particles, their behavior is not known. So they are completely different from hot particles deposited after Chernobyl. So they are different from hot particles deposited after the nuclear weapons test. So it seems that on the distances like Tsukuba, 170 kilometers from the nuclear power plant, the contribution of these particles should be low in terms of total activity of deposit radiocesium. But even so, however, in closing zone, nearby to the Fukushima nuclear power plant, their contribution could be essential, substantial. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of progress in this direction. I think there are several groups, mostly from Tsukuba, who are doing this research, but these are single research. I think this is a real scientific challenge concerning the behavior of these spherical glassy particles. And I think in the future we can expect some research on this, and I would be very interested in getting the information in this direction. Thank you.
Actually, I told already about some comparison between Chernobyl and Fukushima in terms of the the remediation activities. And I would like to support very much Tom's talk that enormous efforts were applied to provide a proper response to this accident. Actually, I cannot see any, I would say, disadvantages of the approach used in Japan, except for one. Now it's time to think about some optimization, what we're doing in these areas. But to provide a proper optimization of the remedial actions, you will need to have extended information from the environmental years monitoring. That's why the projects are very important in this point of view. We have to understand how to optimize the remediation strategy based on the environmental data. But it is not only information about the contamination levels, because we need also to understand the environment itself, because we need also to have some environmental information to predict future behavior of radionuclides in the case of the Fukushima affected areas. And I mentioned many important pros here. That's true. In some areas we can expect higher mobility of radionuclides, higher rate of the self-clearance, higher rate of the contamination. But I believe there are some hotspots where we can expect lower rates. So again, we have to identify radiologically sensitive areas as well. We have to identify radiologically sensitive situations where we can expect more effect than on average in the surrounding areas. About radiological effects, Tom already covered many issues which I would like just to mention. ENEP. After the ENEP Chernobyl incident, we reviewed it, and we did many other almost research on the evaluation of the radiological effects. I'm very glad that these studies are also started at the Fukushima area. Because you see, at this subject, there are many, I would say, speculations on the subject. People are finding actually effects at very low level, but without proper methodological approach. So we have to review when we look at the data, how the data developed, we should obtain it, what was the control, what was the spontaneous level, for example, of abnormalities, etc. Because you see, it is all this, it is also science. How to organize this research. It is like epidemiological science. So this is also, I would say, hot and sensitive topical issue for the areas affected by the Fukushima incident. But I would like to thank you very much. We are very glad to see how much efforts science is doing in the Fukushima affected area. So we are very glad to see how many new applications came from Japan on this subject. And it is really a good contribution to the international science, international ecology. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。よろしいですか？今の聞きたかったことは聞けましたか？もし直接聞きたいことがあればこの後まだいらっしゃると思うので聞いてみてください。今のご意見、すみません、今のお話に関して何かご意見などある方いらっしゃいますか？よろしいですか？そうしましたら他に何か質問、ご意見あるでしょうか？よろしいですか？今回はこれキックオフミーティング原子力人材育成ということで我々の大学環境学研究科の方で今後原子力災害、あってはいけないことなんですがもう起こってしまったこの災害に対してどう対応していくかとか環境中の汚染だったり動物それから人への放射線影響そういうものをきちんと研究できる、調査できる、強化できる、予測できる人を育てようというプロジェクトなんですね。で、皆さん今日ご発表いただいたいろいろな国でも非常にシビアな汚染があってそれをきちんと調査してどうにかレメディエーションしていこうという試みがされているわけですがこのような事故が起こる前起こった後、どのようにその各国でこういう研究をする 人材を育てていったか、または育っていないというお話だったらそれでもいいんですけれども、それに関わる人々、若い人たちをどう育てていったか、また日本ではどう育てていくべきかなどありましたらお願いします。できればそれぞれの方にもう一度お聞きしたいと思います。あとは今の現状ですね、それぞれの国で放射科学だったり放射線に絡む環境科学の分野リサーチャーというのはやっぱり多いのでしょうか、それとも少ないのでしょうか。現状をもしご存知でしたらお聞かせください。またフェセンコ先生は IAEA にいらっしゃるのでいろいろな国の現状をご存知だと思いますので、それも含めてもしよろしければお話しいただきたいと思います。ざっくり
To start with the emergency preparedness and being ready in the event of an emergency, I suppose our institute does a specific section for emergency preparedness and response, and the people in there, well, I'm part of that emergency response team as well. The people in there would have experience in radiometric measurements, of course, but in terms of emergency response, we're always trying to develop rapid assessment methods, so we're able to assess the levels of radioactivity quickly, and it also means having radiometric equipment ready and available for use in the event of emergency as well. So that's the measurement side of things. We also have to have dispersion modeling, so we need to have experience in-house for the modeling of dispersion, particularly in the air, so radioactivity in air dispersion, and those assessments from that. So using, in the event of an accident, we take into account meteorological conditions, we do some predictive modeling, and that will tell us then how to, or where to take the samples from and to measure, and what to measure for. Marine dispersion modeling isn't really critical in the event of emergency in the short term, but in the long term it would be. So that really covers everything in emergency preparedness from our institute's point of view. In terms of human resources and radiometric measurements, it is a problem in our institute in that there are very few universities training students in the areas of radiochemistry and radioanalytical measurements. So it has been left up to the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to fund this research, and we've had some success so far. I suppose we're concentrating on the radiometric measurement point of view, and to a lesser extent radiochemistry as well. We've also recognised the issue of in our institute of a lot of people who were hired just around the time of the Chernobyl accident, and these are actually reaching retirement very soon. So we need to put a plan in place to replace these staff as well. But we are finding it very difficult to hire experienced staff in this area.
I have no experience in emergency prep, so I will not address that component. I can say that both in the United States and in Europe, there's a big need for young scientists who are trained in radiation protection, health physics, and radioecology. So you folks should not have any trouble finding jobs. And they're important jobs. So I encourage you to do your very best and be cautious of your science and do good work, and society will benefit from the training that you're getting.
So, since I represent now Institute of Environmental Radioactivity at Fukushima University, I would say about the preparedness that our institute is directly involved now in the project within the European RODOS system, which is actually the system for the emergency response in Europe. And so a number of our colleagues participated just when it was January, just 2 months ago in Bratislava, on the final meeting on the project Prepare, in which our institute was directly involved. So this means that Fukushima University has a good basis to exchange the knowledge in terms of emergency response with the RODOS system, European system. So I think this is a good basis, and maybe we can just, let's say that this should be encouraged and developed. So in terms of, let's say, education system in Russia, in my country, I would say that radiochemistry and radiation aspects is one of the important issues in education. We have a strong high schools and these universities in Moscow, St. Petersburg, other places in Europe. So this is considered as one of the important direction to prepare the people. But of course there is a historical reasons for that, because of, let's say, all these nuclear plants and so on developed. They needed the people, and I think the system is more or less kept now. There was some reduction, but now it's still okay. Thank you.
Okay. That's very interesting subject area. Emergency response is a very multifaceted issue. What it includes also and background information which should be on place at the time of the accident if necessary. Because you see, actually, it is one of the main issues to have sufficient information at the very beginning to provide proper decision in a very short time. Because you see, actually, emergency phase is a very short period. In the Fukushima emergency phase was completed in September 2011, but the point is that many important decisions which can affect most of the dose to the public should be taken properly in a very short time. So it means also that we have the information, infrastructure, human infrastructure, so we have to instance capabilities countries. I still mentioned about support which we got at the time of the Chernobyl accident from the people who passed through the accident. Me too, so I came to Chernobyl from Kashtin, so and many my colleagues also came from there. So this, I would say, passing of the information through generation is a very important issue. And another important issue is also involvement in the international collaboration with the field. Because you see, many accidents have no any of the limits, of the national limits, national borders. So it's also understand, necessary to understand how to provide proper information to the national community timely, because accident is the matter of concern not only for the nation where this accident yet happened, but also for many surrounding countries. So that's why I am telling that it is really a very multifaceted issue and we need to think how to cover all these aspects. Thank you. Just what you have to comment to that about the information. I was very glad to see that many information which already was provided from Japan, especially on the initial interception of the forest and the agriculture plants made which available by the Japanese scientists. It's very important for this issue because it allows to improve the improvement of some yet models which can be used for будет существовать, что некоторые бывшие солдаты хватит времени. Thank you again.
ありがとうございます。この分野に限らないかもしれないですけれども、やはり、若手の方が頑張って今後世界の、サイエンスを引っ張って若手の方々、ごめんなさい、私のどの立場から自分も頑張ってサイエンスを引っ張っていかなければいけないなと改めて実感しております。他に何かご意見、はい、お願いします。
今日は貴重な講演ありがとうございます。日本では福島原発の事故から5年経って今でも日本各地の他の原子力発電所を今後どう動かしていくかということがまだ議論の最中なんですけれども、そういった時にこういった専門家の方だけではなくて非専門家一般住民の方とってもすごく身近な問題があるんですね。で一方で、日本事故直後は一部の東京の大学が信頼をしたというか、こういった事故を当時作りきれなかったこととかここですごく非難をされて科学の信頼を一部失ってしまったという点もあるんですけど、そういった背景の中で今後こういった研究の成果を専門家ではない人と共有していくなど、どういうことを気をつければよいと思いますか。
If somebody did comments on this question, could you give
That was a very interesting question or comment. I think foremost we have to be honest and as members of the university, it's just absolutely critical to be transparent, be honest with the public, and to probably share our information better with the public than we have. Part of our nuclear energy problem is that that we haven't explained the risk of radiation, background radiation, to the public sufficiently over the years. I'm not sure that we're going to change that in the next several generations, but without doubt, we need to be very transparent and very open with the public in our communication and our research results.
Any other comments on that question?
I suppose I should say that in terms of what happened at Fukushima and in accidents in the past, we've always been very good at the science part of things, but I think as scientists we always, sometimes we always fall down at risk communication, and it's trying to explain to the public in a manner that they'll understand is the big issue there. And transparency is obviously a big thing as well. There is a drive in our organisation to publish all of our data to the public. So this is, we call it open data. So the data that the members of the public see is the exact same as the data that we see as well. I suppose to give an example, shortly after the Fukushima accident, we did publish all our data. The monitoring data we had, as we did pick up some iodine and cesium in our air filters and milk. And when it comes to communicating this to the public, we failed because we published the data using scientific notation, and people couldn't understand it. So this was one small thing we have to be aware of communicating with the public.
I got some great advice in a bar, drinking sake with a local member of Fukushima public. And his advice was quit naming nuclear reactors after the area that they're placed. In other words, for the rest of our lives, and probably the lives of your children and grandchildren, the name Fukushima will be associated with a nuclear accident. And that is going to cause the remediation of that area and the reduction of risk and the public acceptance of that area be delayed for many, many, many years. Now, if you produce rice and it has the name Fukushima on it, and it's sold in Tokyo, even though there might not be any cesium in that rice whatsoever, the person buying the rice is going to see Fukushima and is going to opt to buy a rice from another prefecture. If that reactor had just been called Daiichi and had no name association with the prefecture, perhaps the public's perception of risk would have recovered more quickly than it is. So just fundamental things like that, which we don't think of, will influence the perception of risk and the economic situation that is so difficult for the prefecture right now.
なかなか難しい問題ですね。サイエンティストも少なく、そこから出てきたデータがうまく皆さんに伝わらないとなると、もう壊滅的な状態というか、なかなか難しい状況ではあります。それをなんとか乗り越えてしていればいいと思います。
皆さんから非常に多くの貴重なコメントをいただきました。最後のコメントも含めてですけれども、このプログラムは大学院レベルで、環境科学の修士号マスターを、取らせるための通常のカリキュラムに、原子力災害以降、主に学術的に推進されてきた研究成果をもとに、いくつかの、試験に関する教育のコースを実習、それからレクチャー、講義、そして、海外への視察、研修等を加えて人材育成をするというプログラムです。で、ただこれはまだスタートの段階ですので、その研究成果がこの過去特に5年間にわたる研究成果をいくつかその教育のコースとして当てはめているだけであって、まだとても系統だった教育コンテンツにはまだなっていないところだと思います。そういう意味で、私たちは本当にスタートに立っている、人材育成、教育のカリキュラムとしてはスタートに立っているだけだと思います。特に最後のところで議論になったそういった科学的な知見というもののリテラシーをステークホルダー、さまざまな考えを持つステークホルダーにどうやって届ける、あるいは届けるというよりも自分たちも一緒に考えていくということについてはこのプログラムではまだ含まれていません。ただし近年の大学院レベルの教育の傾向としては科学リテラシーの寛容の仕方や科学コミュニケーション、つまり科学的な知見をさまざまなステークホルダー、さまざまな人々にどうやって伝えるかという能力を寛容する授業というのはかなり増えてきていますし、筑波大学でも大学院生の共通科目としてそういったカリキュラムがあります。ですのでそういったものに対する重要性は我々十分に認識はしています。ただしまだこのプログラムは不完全であることも一方で十分に認識していますので、今日の議論いただいたコメント等を十分に参考にして、走りながら少しでもいいものにプログラムを変えていく努力をするということはお約束をしたいと思います。ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
Maybe very short addition to the previous comment. In principle, radiation is just the one risk factor what we have around us. And Tom is totally right. We have to be transparent, but we have to deliver proper information to the public in the proper way. So it's also a science how to provide this information to the public. Because you see, we get to be pushed isolated from the social science. But I think we need to have together looking at the psychological issues and also social issues, etc. So I would like just to remind you that after the Chernobyl accident, Around 6,000 people dead in the case of the Chernobyl. In the case of Fukushima, nobody. In the case of the Sahel accident in India, 100,000 people were dead in 1 day. So let's don't speak about the loss of the credibility here, because maybe it is our fault how we deliver information about the environmental risks. It is not only radiation. There are actually many factors, but we have to compare them. We need to provide balanced approach to the risk assessment. That's why I'm thinking that we have to work with that, but not in isolation from all other, I would say, science areas. Yeah.
よろしいでしょうか。そうしましたらまだ話したいこともあるとは思いますが、まだ我々のプロジェクトも始まったばかりというか、4月に始まってますね。始まるので、今後、いろいろご意見などありましたらぜひよろしくお願いします。それでは今日4名の方お話しいただきましたが、もう一度拍手をしてそれでは